Hey guys, welcome back. It's your favorite Gimple the Limp, and I am here with my year-end review. This video is not going to be in any specific order. It's going to just be concerning games that I played this year. For the most part, I think most of them did release this year. Maybe not all of them, but it's covering games that I featured on the channel this year. And really, this was just going to be a video just showcasing the ones that stood out to me for whatever reason. The ones that have just stuck in my mind and like, oh, I want to get that one back to the table. And I really enjoyed it. And it stuck with me. Ones that I think that you guys should check out, and you'll definitely be missing out if you don't at least give one of these a shot. So the first one we're going to take a look at, I was kind of iffy about putting this one on the video, but I've had so much experience with it, I'd feel bad leaving it off, even though I know some people haven't, or most people actually haven't got their copies of it yet, and that's World at War 85 by Lock and Load Publishing. Now, I do have the benefit, since I am doing the tutorial videos for that game, that I've had a copy of it for a while now that I've been going over, and I didn't have like the final copy. Actually, I still don't even have the final copy. I've got like the pre-production final copy that I've been using to do my tutorial videos with. But since I had so much experience with it and I've had such a good time with it, and this one has definitely been stuck in my mind actually since the WBC that we went to, not the one that they had this year, but the one last year we went to. Like, this game has just been stuck with me. This was one of my favorites, and I have talked about it a lot, featured it on the channel. So I was like, yeah, I've absolutely got to have it featured here because I have had so much fun with this game. Now, I really can't speak to the component quality. I can say that the components that I've been given for the videos that I've done are excellent. I love the prototype copy components. So if the final production copy is better than the stuff I'm using now, I don't think we're going to have any issues. And that shouldn't be an issue anyway, because Lock and Load is one of those companies that I never worry about when it comes to production quality. They always try to hit top marks as far as that's concerned. But the big thing for me was this game just plays so well. And especially for me with my channel being focused on solitaire, how well does the game play solitaire? And the chip pull, card pull type mechanic that is used in the At War series, the Nations at War, World at War series, just works so well for solitaire play because it gives you that randomization factor that you need, so you can't plan ahead. You can't play the game against yourself in such a way that you're working it in your favor. All right, you know what I'm saying? You can't do that because you can't know for certain what's going to happen, and you don't even know if your units will get activated that turn. They could miss a turn because of the way the cards are drawn, but they're guaranteed the following turn that they will be activated due to game mechanics, which I really like that. So basically tomorrow isn't guaranteed to you, and you can't base your tactics around that. So you have to plan ahead, like, for any possibility that any unit on the board could potentially activate. And, well, okay, that means I need to keep this unit in reserve so that they can perform op fire in case the enemy comes at me from this direction, or I need to push in this direction so I can cover them. There are just so many things that you have to worry about, and I like the fact that this game is a step up in the level. All right, so it's not like strategic level like a World at War, and it's not tactic level like Lock and Load Tactical. You know, it's that step up. I forget the damn word for it. One of you guys can put it down in the comments for me. But that level where you're dealing with companies and levels like that instead of dealing with squads and individual vehicles. You know, a company of tanks, you know, is represented by a counter in this game. And I really liked that level. I didn't think I was going to like it at first, but when I really sat down with the game and I was watching it be played, that was the first thing I did, was watching it at WBC. And I think Keith, one of the designers of the game, was chuckling at me because I kept coming back to the table and I kept watching what they were doing, and it was distracting me from the other games that were there. There were so many games to be excited about, but it looked so good on the map. And the way that this game can be expanded too, in the fact that if you want to play it as a miniatures game, and I have seen some people doing some conversions online to set it up for miniatures, like they have the miniature rules in the game itself. So you have cards that tell you it will move this many inches or centimeters or whatever distance you decide to use, depending on the scale that you're playing at, instead of moving hexes if you're doing a miniatures-based game. And I can't even think of another hex-based war game that has included the ability to turn it into a miniatures game if you want to go that route. So that's just a step above and beyond for someone who really wants to dip into the game. And one of my favorites is one of the expansions. I showed this in one of my videos. I think it was Frankfurt expansion. Frank something, I forget the specifics. But I remember I showed a single map tile, and I was just showing the one because the one was big enough, to take up most of my camera space. And then, I'm showing that the massive map would be like 8 times the size of that. So you can have a monster level game experience with this if you want to go that route. So it has so much variety to it. You can play it down a small, more tactical feel type game that you can get done in an evening, or you could have a game spread across a huge number of maps that could last you weeks before you actually finish it. And all of it plays well solitaire or even as a miniatures game. So yeah, World at War 85. I know a lot of you already have it on pre-order. That should be actually delivering soon. From what I've seen, the ship should be arriving any day now. So a lot of people should be having that in their hands soon. I look forward to having the final copy in my hands soon. It will definitely be featured again on the channel as soon as that comes in. So you guys stay tuned for that one. So similar in line to what we were talking about with World at War 85 is one that I covered just very recently, like it literally just came off my table, is Conflict of Heroes, the 3rd edition of Awakening the Bear. And I gotta say, this one it blew me away. I keep referring to WBC, but I learned so much when I went there, and I am planning on going again this year. I talked to Uwe, and he was explaining how the new 3rd edition was going to work with the dice system and how they were changing over how you had points previously, and you would execute your actions. Say you had 7 points, you could spend a couple points moving, and then the rest of the points, 4 or 5 points, performing a shoot action, but then that unit would be spent, and it would go back and forth. Well, the whole dice system now changed it, so now you didn't know if a unit was going to be spent. And that small change, I know it seems like such a small change, but it really overhauled the way that game plays. And it gave it a much more dynamic feeling in just the back and forth. Because I played it solitaire, I played this huge tank battle where I had the monster tank expansions, and I put the monster tanks from the German side against the monster tanks from the Soviet side, and that game was a freaking blast. I gotta say, I love the hell out of it. I would actually put that as one of the best tactical games that I've played this year. I mean, it was just awesome experience. It really does get down into the minutia when you're worrying about the fact that the counters now in this game are directional. So your tank, if it's pointing forward, well, they're worrying about your frontal armor. But if the enemy gets around to your side, where you're weaker there, and you have to worry about that, not letting them get on your flanks so they can tear into your armor. But it's the same way with your infantry. They're weaker from the flanks as well, just, like they should be. Now, this one didn't have the randomization of like World at War 85, where you had a chit pull type deal where you didn't know who was going next. In this one, it's a you go, I go type system. But now I again played it solitaire, so I had the solitaire AI deck, and the way Academy Games does their solitaire AI deck is it is very specific to the game. So this is the solitaire expansion for Awakening the Bear, and it's designed to be played with that game. Now, Lock and Load Publishing, the way their solitaire cards work, it's more generalized. So like their tactical games, the cards have a less specific type of order on them, but it allows the cards to be used with a greater variety. I do find that with Conflict of Heroes, that specificity, you know what I'm saying, does give it a more specific feel. It has the enemy reacting to you in a more precise manner, I guess is a way to think of it. I really felt like the AI was working against me in what I was trying to do. It would move the tanks trying to flank around on me, or it would slam the tanks into my face trying to get close range bonuses, of which it did a few times, taking out my tanks. And I made a few bad calls, left some of my tanks hanging out, and the AI capitalized on that and was able to take them off the board. I also liked how it had the rumored enemy system, so you didn't know specifically who it was that you were coming across. It kind of gave you that fog of war feel. So, in other games, as you're moving up, you can see the counters that are out there. So, well, that's a T-34, that's a group of infantry that are moving towards me. Well, this was just a rumored enemy counter that was moving towards you, so you didn't know specifically what it was. Now, I was doing a tank battle, so I knew that whatever I encountered was going to be a tank, but the big thing for me was I had to find the enemy commander. And the funniest part about the playthrough I did is that there was a set amount of no enemy counters in there. So there was the occasion that you were supposed to have it to where you pulled and there actually wasn't an enemy there. Your eyes were playing tricks on you. And some damn reason, I drew all of those little pink counters first. It was driving me crazy. I think it was like the first 5 counters that I drew were all no enemy. I pulled them all at once. So I didn't actually encounter real enemy resistance until a little bit into the game, which was just kind of funny the way it played out that way. But that was the big thing that I noticed was with Conflict of Heroes, is that randomization was there thanks to other game mechanics, especially the spent mechanic being changed to a randomization with rolling die or drawing cards if it was for the AI, which actually Uwe did mention there was something else, like if you decide to roll the die for the AI units instead of drawing cards for them from the solitaire deck, you would just give the AI, I think it was a couple extra command cards to kind of make up for the difference, but you can have them use the die system same way that your troops are using if you want, which just really, like I said, that's the big thing for me. That really took Conflict of Heroes to another level in the fact that I did not know if an enemy was going to be spent. The AI did not know if my units were going to be spent. I didn't know if my units were going to be spent. There were a couple of times I was able to get more than one attack off with a unit that I otherwise normally wouldn't have, which was able to, really give me that advantage at the moment when I needed. And it would give you that cheer, like, oh yes, I still get to attack. I don't have to spend a unit. But they did have the stress mechanic, which I really liked. I think that really did add to the game, in that if you use a unit, then the enemy will go, and then when it comes back to your side, that unit that you had just used would be stressed, so it would cost an extra point to activate them, and it kept you from just activating the same unit over and over and over again without any type of penalty. I found that it worked well adding that to the AI and myself. If you want to have the AI be harder or easier, you can have the stress mechanic applied to them or not applied to them. Really good system. I really liked how that worked out. It really just came down to some tokens that you use to apply to show stress on units, and a weighted 10-sided die that didn't have 10 sides, but they're weighted die that really streamlined this game and took it up to the next level. Component quality, I don't even have to touch on. Conflict of Heroes is through the roof. I did feel bad. I dinged them for their cards being thin, but I actually put out an update video on that. It wasn't that the cards were thin, it's that they were made of plastic instead of cardboard, so they were waterproof. I actually did the video showing where I was dipping a card into a cup of water to show, I was wrong on that, so I shouldn't have dinged them on that one. Component quality, absolutely through the roof as well. Now, this next one is something that was very unique, all right? A game I had never seen anything like this before, and that was U-Boat, all right? U-Boot is the way it's spelled. I don't know, is that like the German spelling? B-O-O instead of B-O-A? I don't know. I'm going to call it U-Boat. It was a game that simulated controlling a U-Boat, obviously, during World War II, and you would have control of different commanders or different people inside the submarine. So you would have the captain or the navigator or the engineer or I forget what the last one was. There were 4 different stations that you could have. Now, the game was designed around having more players, but it could be played solitaire. And the big unique factor about this game is the fact that you needed a tablet, a phone. It had an app to go along with it that you had to use. Now, a lot of people don't like that. I get it. Some people, they want just their game. And see, me, I get that because I'm not big into Vassal. I don't much care to play the game on the computer. I want to sit down and fill the components. But I do believe that having an app behind a game can really bring it to a level that you're not able to have when you have just the physical components themselves to worry about. A lot of people do get into the worry, though, that the app won't be supported, or what happens 10 years from now if I can't download the app or I can't get it. You know, I have this game that I can't play. I can't speak to those things just yet. I'm hoping that they've taken steps to, mitigate any of those factors that could be a problem later on down the line. But it really is such a unique experience because the app can show you things, and like in this, you can operate in real time operating your sub, and you actually had to plot the direction that you were going. And that was one of the neatest things for me. I would copy out a bunch of the maps, and that way you could actually write on them with a pencil. But I would actually have to plot and figure out with the little measuring tools what direction I was going and how fast I was going and about where I should be. And now the game did have like a sextant or something like that you could click on in the app that would give you your rough estimate of where you were, just in case you got lost. But just the ability to get that in depth into the game, that you're actually using tools, and that was one of the navigator's jobs, was to use the tools on the map to figure out what direction we needed to go in out of 360 degrees, and determine the speed. Tell the captain how fast we need to go. The captain would tell the engineer would say full speed ahead, captain. Roger that. Really, really, really cool way to operate this. The big drawback that I saw with it, though, is that since the game is more designed for multiplayer instead of solitaire, you did have to kind of crank back the difficulty a little bit to even out the fact that you were playing solitaire. I found that playing the game on easy helped, because otherwise you really didn't have the time. It would rush you a little bit, and you didn't have enough orders to account for everything that needed to be done, because you had a limited amount of orders to actually execute everything that you needed to do. And the way the game was set to play on normal, you would run out of orders, almost half your orders, just by determining how fast you needed to go in what direction and then actually implementing that. They did take and fix it and get everything set up right. There was a lot of posts on Reddit and BGG as far as all that was concerned to kind of help streamline the game. But the way I played it, you guys can obviously go check the videos, worked really well for me. I had a blast with the game. It was fun to try to track down enemy shipping. And the first time I actually sank a ship and saw it blow up on my screen, I was all excited. I know I wasn't playing it, perfectly right at that moment, because there's so many guys that you're having to keep track of. Like, you even have your little minis that you're keeping track of on the sub and where they're located. So your crew's here, your crew's there, and you can't dive if your crew's on the upper part of the ship or they're drowning. But the first time I actually sank a ship, I was jumping up and down. I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. It was just one of the freaking coolest things I'd ever done with a video game. So yeah, U-Boat does have its drawbacks. It's not a perfect game by any means, but it is such a unique experience that if you were into submarine warfare, World War II, war game type stuff, you are really depriving yourself by not trying this one out. I had just the best time with it. Now, if you are a hardcore, I will never play a game with an app, okay, skip it. This one isn't for you, but I guarantee you it is absolutely fun to try. But if you are going to play it solitaire like I do, I absolutely recommend cranking back the difficulty, just a little bit at least, to at least help you get warmed up into the game. And make sure you give yourself enough orders to actually accomplish what you're trying to do, so you're not burning out. You're operating one brain versus what was supposed to be 4 brains taking on all the different areas. So you just need to give yourself that little bit extra time. Okay, so the next one on my list is one that you guys have seen plenty of times. I think I've covered this game in its iterations like 3 times now, something like that. I don't know. It'll be covered again. I know that. And that's Warfighter. That's from DVG. And this game, it's kind of like coming home to mom for the holidays. You know, you walk in, she's got some hot chocolate, some cookies, fire going in the hearth. You just feel so warm and familiar. That's how Warfighter is. That's one of the first games that I ever played when I started getting into wargaming. And it always just feels like I'm kind of coming back to my roots when I go back to Warfighter. And it's such an expansive game. You can play almost any theater that you want to play, and you can mix and match with different theaters, different time periods. Warfighter is almost like Legos in the fact that you can just mix and match the pieces into whatever version you want to play and just have a good time with it. And they've got freaking zombies, man. I mean, how can you not like a game that's got zombies? That was actually, I think, my most recent playthrough where I had some modern troops. So from the modern version of Warfighter, I took the troops, made up a squad, modern guys, and said they went through a portal back in time and they met a cleric from World War II era. They were having to fight zombie Nazis, actually zombie and Japanese Nazi zombie peoples on their way to try to get back to the time portal so they could get out of this hellscape that they had been dumped into. And it was one of the funnest Warfighter games that I'd ever played. And that's what Warfighter actually brings to you, is the fact that, like, I think if you're a hardcore fan, yeah, you can get every expansion to the game, but there are so many expansions, so many options when it comes to Warfighter that you can kind of just pick and choose. Like, I like a little bit of this, and I like a little bit of that. Here's some World War II. Here's some modern desert combat. I'll take a little bit of that. Of course, I'm going to get the zombies, and they've even got vehicles in there now from different nations, different time periods. Bring all that in and just play with the pieces that you want. There's so many things. There's metals, there's fortifications, there's vehicles, there's supernatural. They're even planning on doing fantasy at some point in the future, which I am really looking forward to, because I think it would be awesome to take some fantasy type people, swords and boards and bows and arrows and that type stuff, and have them fighting Nazi zombies from World War II. That would be a freaking awesome Warfighter experience. But they haven't done fantasy yet. Hey, DVG, if you're watching this, do fantasy. Get it out really quick. But that's the thing. Warfighter really is just that comfort food, right? Beer and pretzels, coming home to mommy, curling up with a wife on the couch. That's the feeling you're going to get from Warfighter, because it is familiar. And once you understand the game, and it's not a hard game to learn by any means. I mean, it's a DVG game. They're always streamlined, always easy to pick up. So once you understand the basics of the game, you can basically pick up any expansion you want and understand the general premise. They might have a special rule here or there, just depending on which version it is that you have to learn, but you're not going to have to learn a whole new game system. That's kind of what I mean when it comes to Warfighter being a familiar game. You can pick up almost any aspect of it, create whatever scenario you want to play, and just have fun with it. That's what I really like, just that expansive feel of the game. All right, the next one on the list is a little different from my usual fare as well, but I really enjoyed this solitaire, and that was something new to me when it came to skirmish miniature-based games. This game is Fallout Wasteland Warfare by Modifius, I think I'm pronouncing that right, games. It's a skirmish-based game similar to Legion or Warhammer 40K, if you want to go that route, the overly expensive miniatures route. 40K, I mean, not Fallout. But the game was actually a lot of fun. Now, I love the Fallout universe. I've always loved Fallout since I played the first game way back on PC back in the day. I played Fallout 2 all the time when I was younger. And then, of course, 3, 4, and Vegas. I liked 4. A lot of people didn't. I had fun with it. I even liked the Fallout 76. The only thing with it is that this subscription thing they did recently, no. That was so bad. I know I'm getting off topic, but that was just horrible. They have screwed up 76. I had fun with it. If you just sat down and enjoyed it for what it was, a chance to shoot Fallout bad guys with a friend next to you, it wasn't a bad experience. And I had fun, playing that with my brother, but man, they screwed the pooch on that one. Now, Wasteland Warfare did not screw the pooch. They actually did really well with it. They came up with a system that actually worked fairly well for a skirmish game, being solitaire. One of the problems with skirmish miniatures games is they're very hard to have solitaire because you're not operating on a set grid. There's no hexes or squares or anything where you're moving along like that. You're just moving in an open area or through corridors, whatever terrain that you're playing with, and you're moving in inches. So you really need to kind of have that opponent. But they came up with a card and dice system, so the card would tell you what their general ideas are going to be, whether they're aggressive, moving and shooting, moving into cover and shooting, or coming up and trying to bash you in melee. And then to keep that random factor in there, they had a dice system, so you would roll, see what symbol you got, and depending on the circumstances, if they were hurt, they would go in this direction, or if they weren't hurt, they would go in this direction, depending on the card. So it was kind of similar to how the tactical games I had spoke about previously worked with their cards. You didn't have to draw a card each time. It just had the instructions on one card for that type of unit. So if you had a superhuman or super mutant brute, all the brutes would operate off the same card, and then you would roll the dice for each one of the brutes to see what their action was going to be. And it worked well. The AI, for the most part, would go after the objective when it needed to go after the objective, and it would go after me when it needed to. The thing is just like any solitaire game, you are going to have those times where you're going to have to kind of make a judgment call, like, nah, I think the AI should probably do this. It'd probably be a little bit better for it. So, yeah, it wasn't perfect, but I think it was as close as it could be with a skirmish game. I mean, I couldn't even imagine trying to solitaire something like Warhammer 40k. It's just too much. I mean, you have too many miniatures on the field. There's no way they could come up with a card or a dice system that even work for that. But with this, where you only have a handful of miniatures that are having to be controlled, it worked really, really well. I gotta say, it did. As far as like components were concerned with the game, that I was a little hit and miss. Overall, the components weren't bad. I would have maybe liked to have seen some of the tokens be a little bit bigger because they did have some small counters in the game. The miniatures that came with the core box itself weren't as good, and this is something that I think they just dropped the ball on. The expansion packs all have high quality resin miniatures, but the ones that came in the core box to get you started are like a lower quality plastic. And it always makes me wonder, like, why the hell would you drop the ball? Like, I would rather pay a couple bucks more on the core box and get a higher quality miniature. That was one of the things that I dinged it on in my video playthrough with it, was the ones that came with the base game itself to get you started just weren't as good as the expansions. So it kind of was like, I don't enjoy painting these ones. And yes, you do have to paint them, by the way. I forgot to mention that. So if you're not into painting miniatures, maybe avoid this one. But they were harder to paint just because of the type of material they were made out of versus the others. Some people gave me some advice about washing them in soap and alcohol and stuff like that to see if I could get whatever that coating was off of them to get them to paint better. So component-wise, wasn't the best. But as far as the experience, just the skirmish game with miniatures, and I love miniatures. I've said this in some of my other videos. The miniatures based like dungeon crawl type games, of which there are a plethora out there. That's kind of like my weak sauce. That's my little guilty pleasure. So being able to have the skirmish one and have a solitaire component that played really, really well, I really enjoyed that. So I'm going to have to look now into Star Wars Legion, because if there's a way to play that solitaire as well, I'm going to really have to get into that one too. All right, so this last game that I'm going to talk about was the surprise hit of the year for me. All right, and this is one that I covered a while back. And actually, if I didn't have a channel that I had to run, it would probably have a permanent table dedicated to it just so I could keep it up and play it whenever I felt like. And this game is Thunder in the East, which I actually guess now is by GMT Games because they were bought from their previous owners, but they did keep Alan and Frank, I think, went over to GMT, so now the sequel should be coming out from GMT. The Mediterranean version is going to be coming out, which I'm definitely going to try to beg, plead, borrow, and steal a review copy from them because I really want to cover that. This one just really blew me away. I know some of you guys are thinking, okay, well, why was this one your surprise hit? Because It is not designed for solitaire play in any way. No shape, form. There's no cards. There's no dice system. There's nothing. This is a purely heads-up strategic level game, right? So no solitaire components included for the game whatsoever. The big thing for me is the game was just so well designed. It was designed so well to the point that it could be played solitaire and really, really, really enjoyed it. They streamlined the hell out of it. Now, this is a game that I would call a monster game, right? A lot of people say, no, it's like a mini monster. No, to me, it's a monster. It's big. I mean, it took up my whole table, right? I have 2 tables that I generally am playing on. Push them together. They're the 2 foot by 6 foot tables. All right, I put a table cover over them. Gives me plenty of space. So 4 feet by 6 feet is generally the room that I have. When all the maps were laid out and the player aids that you needed for the game, because there was a couple big player aids where you could put the counters for the change box and everything. Once you got all that laid out, that took out pretty much the majority of that table. All right, so 4 feet by 6 feet. Yeah, I had some room left off to the side, but it took up a mess load of room. So it's absolutely a monster. Sure, there are plenty games that are bigger, Atlantic Wall, games like that take up a lot more space. Case Blue takes up a lot more space, but this one definitely monster category. Well, like I said, the big thing came down to just how well the game played. And I don't know if I just got lucky or something, but this one just clicked with me. You know how sometimes you'll sit down to try to learn a game and it's just not sitting with you. You know how many times you read the rule book or the example of play, you just can't get it into your head. For some reason, this one just set with me. Right? Now, of course, I made a few mistakes when I was playing the game. Everyone does, especially games of this caliber. But to have a monster level game with the amount of counters that we're talking about and the amount of space that we're talking about, and to have it feel like it plays as smoothly as did, like just like butter with this game, that really shows the time and depth and strategy that these designers took when they were creating this game, that they really did try to perfect it as much as they could for ease of play and for quality of play. The big thing that I liked is that the rulebook was color-coded. So the base rules were a certain color in the rulebook, and then the optional rules were a certain color in the rulebook, and then the campaign rules were a certain color in the rulebook, but not just the rulebook, but in the player aids as well. So when you were looking at the sequence of play, the player aid, you could avoid the parts that you weren't using. Like my playthrough series, I did an extended playthrough series on the game. I only covered the base rules of the game, right? Because otherwise, with a game of that size, it would have taken me forever to try to get everything. Because with a game that big, I can't do a little bit of playthrough before I'm trying to film it. It's just too much, right? So I have to jump into it with both feet, in essence. But I really liked how I'd look on the turn sequence player aid, and I'm going down and each little part is color coded. So I knew if I came up to yellow, for example, I could ignore that optional rule because I wasn't playing with those rules. Or if I came up to a brown rule, I could ignore it because I wasn't playing a campaign. So I didn't have to worry about that portion. That's what I'm talking about. They really streamlined it, even down to the player aids. And I mentioned this in the overview that I did about the game. They had the change boxes. And the big thing about this game is with the level of the counters that they were having, you'd have like cores that would get broke down into divisions, you know, just depending on damage, or you were breaking them apart, just depending on whatever's going on with the game. But they had change boxes built into both sides player aids, and it would show you on the change box, these 2 counters equal this counter. So you would put 2 smaller counters together to get the big level monster counter. And you could do that, back or forth. So if you had a big counter, it could be broken down into 2 smaller units, or 2 smaller units into a bigger unit. And it was the same way with the little, all the different little pieces that would add together. And the way I explain that is to think of it like a cash register that had to remain at a set level of money. So if you took out X amount, you had to put back X amount to keep things balanced out. I really liked how they did that. You know, they had a separate section for units that you could buy to actually increase the units that you had on the board. But the way they set up those change boxes helped keep it easy when you were playing the game to understand how the units were breaking down, or if they took damage, or off to the sides where they had what was called the core remnants box, where if your division took damage or you had a little piece left over, so the unit wasn't completely wiped out, there was a remnant left, that's where we put onto the board. And one of the bonuses with this game being as big as it was is, even though you were having to play both sides to the best of your ability, it would take you a little bit of time to, do one side. It was easy. It wasn't like I was stressing trying to get one side's actions done. But I would use some of my own markers, some of their markers, to lay out everything, finish out one side, and then usually I would stop, process the film footage and, put it up, and then I would come back a little bit later to do the other side. But by that point, I wasn't thinking of that first side anymore. I was thinking of, the other side. So if I did the Germans, then I was thinking about the Soviets on the next one. And it really, for a game where you're sitting there hot seating both sides, it really didn't feel like it. All right, just because you did have that little bit of space, a little bit of time, and the way the game flowed, I really did feel like I was working in two different directions. Okay, so when I really was playing the Soviet side, I was playing the Soviet side. I wasn't thinking about what the Germans were doing. I didn't start thinking about that until I actually sat back in that seat. It's a hard concept to describe. I'm sure some of you get what I'm talking about that have played games like this, Solitaire, before. And I can't put my finger on any one thing that made the experience so much more enjoyable with this one than I've had with some of other games that I've tried to do this with. But it just worked so well for a game that didn't have any chip pulling, any dice, any cards, anything to help with solitaire play. It just worked well. Even the little quality of life things that they did, like the dice that they included that weren't meant to be rolled, they had different numbers on each side, and you would use those to put on certain supply points around the map just to help you visualize what your supply radius was. Because long story short, you would get supply from cities and it would have to be traced, line of hexes, unbroken hexes to the units, yada yada. Same stuff you guys have seen before. But when you're looking at the map, it's hard to see that. But if you have a 3D object like a dice sitting on top of those areas, it's very much easier to see, okay, these are my supply points. I can count out this many hexes from this, hex out to my unit to see if they are within supply. That was an absolute bonus when it came to quality of life to helping the game flow. Now, I know some people would have liked to have seen the air power work a different way. I think they nailed it when it came to air power, because it's so hard to do air power when it comes to games like this. They abstracted it enough, but you still had your counters, you still had your airplanes that you were having to worry about, but they wouldn't get, for the most part, they could get into air combat with each other. I'm not going to get into all the specifics. Watch the videos if you want to see those. But for the most part, when it came down to helping the ground support units, so if they actually did some close air support, they would essentially be adding some special dice that could get you some extra modifications on your combat results table. I really liked how that worked out. So you had to think about your air power on how you were using it and determining the amount that you would send, where you would send it, what areas you were going to support, if the enemy was going to send their interceptors to try to stop you, if you had to send escorts to protect your bombers and your close air support. It was a really elegant system. And then they, again, had their own player aid that would be used to determine what level of repair or rearmament the aircraft was. And it was even different depending on the side. The Germans had better air power and could reinforce their stuff a little bit quicker than the Soviets could reinforce theirs. So just depending on how much you used, when you used it, would determine where it was on the player aid and how long it would be before that aircraft could be used again. And even with things like Blitzkrieg, so when the war starts, right, the very first scenario, Barbarossa, there's a lot of rules that weren't overly complicated, but were historical, like made historical sense of why it was that route. Like I think the Soviets couldn't use air power in the first turn because they were kind of caught flat-footed, or things along those lines that really helped to simulate the fact that they were hit with blitzkrieg, and then you got into the normal avenues of play. So I could sit here and talk about this game for a while. All right, I've talked about it a lot previously. I always mention it. And I just got to say, if you like monster games, if you're into World War II level games, if you like strategic, Thunder in the East is definitely one you should take a look at. If you are into the Mediterranean, definitely check out that one's coming. I think it's called The Middle Sea is the next one that's going to be in the series. I really hope that they keep with the same type of components that came with this one. That way the maps and everything should be able to match right up, because I know from what the designers were talking about, their end goal, because I think they have 3 or 4 in the entire series that they're planning on doing, that all the maps would be able to line up. And if you wanted to, I mean, this would be hell, I'd need like my whole garage floor to do it. You could set out and hook up all the maps and have the entire game going off, right? So the Thunder in the East and the Middle Sea, and then whatever they're deciding to call the war there in Britain and France and Germany and that area, the war in Europe, you would say. But to have all of that lined up and actually out on the table to see would just be phenomenal. I would love to have a game like that go on. See if they should do that at WBC. I'd be thrilled to film it. But yeah, I'll stop ranting. Can't recommend it enough. Love Thunder in the East. Love the system. Definitely check out my videos on it if you want to see a little bit more, because otherwise I'll just keep ranting about it. So anyway, this was my year-end review. Just a few games that I had a lot of fun with. There are plenty others that I showed on the channel that I just don't have time to cover because I'll keep going on forever. But these are the ones that really stuck out to me as just standouts, and ones you guys should take a look at and see if it strikes your fancy as well. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this. Y'all take care. Hope you have a happy Christmas, Merry New Year, and all the other good stuff that goes with it. Y'all take care. I'll catch you in the next one.